Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Welcome to the first virtual café of the Chapel for Europe. I'm Father Christian Sova, the director of the chapel. A big part of you knows the chapel already. A multicultural place, not only for prayer and celebration, but also for reflection and dialogue on important issues, not only European. Tonight, the chapel gets beyond the physical borders of the European quarter with the topic Corona crisis, a crossroads for the European Union. The topic very up to date. In today's issue of La Libre Belgique, at the first page, we could read COVID-19 et maintenant. So COVID-19 and now what? What long-term lessons can we draw from the Corona crisis? This and other questions will be discussed tonight by Mr. Herman Van Rompuy in dialogue with Victoria Martín de la Torre and Father Martin Maier. Mr. Van Rompuy, Victoria Martín, thank you very much to accept our invitation. Mr. Herman Van Rompuy doesn't really need to be presented, I think. He spent his life in politics, became Prime Minister of Belgium and the first President of the European Council. Currently, among other activities, you are President of the European Policy Center, Chairman of the Board of the College of Europe, and last but not least, Honorary President of our Chapel for Europe. Convinced Christian and convinced European. Thank you very much to having joined us tonight. Victoria Martín de la Torre is the Spanish journalist and the author of the acclaimed book, Europe, A Leap into the Unknown, a journey back in time to meet the founders of the European Union. Victoria also works as the spokesperson at the European Parliament. However, tonight, Victoria, you are with us in private, and thank you very much for joining us and for sharing. Father Martin Maier is the German Jesuit, Secretary for European Affairs at Jesuit European Social Center. Before, you were for a long years an editor of the Stimmen der Zeit, so Voice of the Time, I think the oldest cultural and the very authoritative monthly magazine on the Christian culture. And also for years, a pastor to a rural community in El Salvador. Well, how our virtual cafe will work? We will start with about 45 minutes exchange between Mr. Van Rompuy in dialogue with Victoria and Father Martin Maier. After this, we will try to collect and respond, or the panelists will try to respond on the question of the public. To ask questions, you can do it in English and French. Please do it by questions and answers. So at the bottom of your screen, you should have the Q&A button. So just please use this, and then we probably will not be possible to respond to every question, but we will do our best. I collect and I will just ask the question for, now you can specify to whom you would like to ask the question. You also can write, where are you based? Just asking, or what nationality is also could give the color, and it might also give some context of the answer. Well, so I think this is already everything, everything concrete. This is the virtual cafe. Even virtual is a cafe. I hope that you prepared the tasty tea or coffee or just a drink for you. So feel comfortable, and the floor or the cafe floor is yours. Thank you very much. Victoria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So probably like the first thing I would like to say is, well, thank you so much for this invitation by the chapel. I'm very thrilled to be with you tonight, to have the opportunity for this exchange with such speakers, and also with the many friends that are joining online, because I have, like many of my friends told me that it was a great occasion and that they would definitely follow. So it's great that we can also answer to their questions. So maybe also to introduce myself, I'm Spanish. So I come from a country that has been hardly hit by this pandemic, but I live in Brussels. So in a way, I was suffering with my family in Spain, with my many friends who were under lockdown. And also I was feeling lonely because I had to be far from my family, but still trying to keep up also with our work in Brussels, thinking that in a way, what we do here is also contributing, no, to the solution and to make a better situation. So from my personal experience, I see already that this pandemic has shaken really our everyday lives, our foundations, and both at a personal, but also at a collective level, because we have been confronted with death, but also with powerlessness, with something that we just couldn't expect. No? We think that we live in really modern times with technology and research. So I think that we were all shocked that something like this could happen. And so I was reading an article, Mr. Van Rompuy, that you wrote for the European Policy Center, in which you were quoting an old man who said, "My world may have flipped, but my priorities are falling back into order." So I thought that this was a very compelling thought, but I would like to know how you think that this could be applied to the European Union, if this shaking of our foundations in a way can reestablish the priorities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This quote comes from an old American man. I read it in the New York Times. But I think that old man, I'm also 72, so I feel a bit, I have some sympathy with this anonymous man. I had, I think, a similar experience as he has. And you know, the pandemic, everybody has his own experience. You spoke about powerlessness, about loneliness, but others have experienced the stillness. Finally, the world is much slower than before. A step aside the rat race in which we are living every day. It was also a moment of reflection. So you have people who had a terrible experience, illness, and even the prospect of dying. You had people who were locked in and felt that loneliness, but others, and there's a minority, but a rather strong minority, for them it was also an opportunity to think about their lives. And without what and without whom can I live or not live? So what is important in life? What is a priority in my life? And even if you miss somebody, you spoke about your family, then you really acknowledge, then you really have to recognize how important some people in your life are. You forget it most of the time because it's so normal that you can see them, that you can touch them. But the day that this is impossible, then it is quite a shock. And what is also quite a shock was that, as you said, we live in a well-organized, in a very rational way, very efficient way, a world, and all of a sudden there's a turnaround. We live in another world. We were not in a war, but we were in another world. And how can this happen? How can this change happen on such a short notice? And then you see how vulnerable we are. And this vulnerability is something new. We were used to, as I said, a world that was too much and too well organized. So this has to be a period, and for some it was a period of reflection. What matters in life? What is the heart of the matter for me? That's why I found also this quote of this man: "My world may have flipped, but my priorities are falling back into order." Not being too long, you asked me what is it for the European Union? I think for the European Union, not for everybody in the Union, but for many, many, this was the feeling: we are all in the same boat and we have to help each other. This was really the moment of solidarity. And some were ready to support others who were in the same boat, because this crisis is not a man-made crisis. You cannot say the Greek or they managed badly their budget, or the Mediterraneans and so on. You cannot say it, because the pandemic, the corona crisis, came from outside. It is an external shock. And everybody was living in that kind of shock. And for me, the priority, I said, not for everybody, but for me, the priority should be solidarity. We are in the same boat. We support each other. We help each other.
Thanks. I think maybe Martin wants to ask the second question.
First of all, I'm very pleased and privileged to be in this common reflection with Mr. Herman van Rompuy and Victoria. I want to take up what Mr. van Rompuy said about the question of priorities. I think we all have been deeply shaken, and we shared experiences also of fear, of suffering. And just today I got news also from India, where the pandemic is terribly increasing. So it's not over. And I think a first thought should go to the victims, to people who are suffering and dying. At the same time, it raised the question of priorities. A French philosopher, Bruno Latour, he sent out a questionnaire, and he said, he formulated questions, and he said we should think about what was important for me before the crisis and what will remain important. And for me, it evokes also one of the key sentences of the gospel: "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul?" I think one experience was that we felt that human life is prior to economy. And this was an admirable, common shared conviction that in this situation, the economy is second, and what is first is to protect and to save human lives. And in this sense, I think the crisis brought us to the essential questions of the sense of the meaning of life, and it brought us also to the question of values, because the question of priorities always is linked with the question of values. What are the essential values? And I think we shouldn't be too quick to speak also the crisis is an opportunity, but in the original sense of the word crisis in Greek, it has this double orientation that it's a serious shock, and at the same time it opens also opportunities, and it can be the opening also of new ways. And this is my hope also for the European Union. Mr. Van Rompuy was underlining the importance of solidarity. This is the very foundation of the beginning also of the European Union. You worked this out wonderfully, Victoria, in your book about the founding fathers. And it was one of the founding fathers, Jean Monnet, who said that the European Union is forged through crisis. And we also have to admit that at the beginning, the Union was failing and left Italy and Spain alone. And there was great deception in Italy and Spain. But after some weeks, the Union was regaining solidarity and proposing also rescue packages. And I think it's not only a question of economics, but solidarity is more. And my hope is that this crisis will deepen the solidarity and will deepen also the common conviction in the European Union.
Then if I may jump in, if there's no specific question, then maybe on this solidarity, I would like to ask something. Maybe I'm going to be a bit cynical, but since I work in the institutions and I see the everyday discussions, I have had the impression over the last weeks that sometimes some of the politicians and maybe also the citizens, they always claim solidarity when they mean helping me, no? But that this concept of solidarity, it's still very like national or tribal. And I don't see so much the search for the common good. And I think that the basis of the community, according to Robert Schuman and the definition of the founding fathers, was this supranational community whose goal is the common good, which is more than the addition of the individual good. And I'm not sure if the current leaders understand really this concept of community, even if they always call for solidarity. So what do you think about that?
Leaders are not saints, and you should not put the bar too high. You take the risk to be disappointed all the time. So that is the advice of an old man that I give you. But it is always a compromise between the national interests and the European interests, between particular interests and between what you called the common good, the general European interest. And I lived through the Eurozone crisis, which was a totally different crisis. There it was about the life or death of our common currency, and in some way, and Chancellor Merkel said it, of the European Union. It was a big, big existential crisis. But this crisis is about life and death of people. That's a totally different crisis. And here also, you see this tension between looking for oneself and thinking at the others, between national interests and European interest. So this is not new. This has always been the case in the European Union. But you have to see also what prevails ultimately. What comes out of this tension. And for me, the compromise found by the French president and the German chancellor was something that was unprecedented. Had this package of 500 billion gifts. You can even speak about transfers, but we will not be provocative and call it gifts. Grants, not loans, not only loans. And so this was showing we are in the same boat and we are helping each other. And I forget very easily all the discussions prior to this compromise. And I am sure that in July or in August, we will find a compromise. And the basis of that compromise will still be the Macron-Merkel compromise that they fixed in a few weeks ago. So for me, this was a gesture of Macron and Merkel that you can compare with the big moments in the European Union. So I'm always trying to see the positive evolutions also in the Union. I can be very cynical. When you have lived your life in politics, at certain moments, you can become cynical. But it shouldn't overwhelm us. We have to look at the results. May I say a word to Father Maier about this tension between the economy and health? Yes, of course, health in the first stage of the pandemic was the biggest value, and the economy comes second. But the economy is not business. The economy is also your job. The way you can, I speak now in a very romantic way, the way you can feed your family. It is also about combating poverty. You know, in Africa now, the pandemic is creating 150 million people again in extreme poverty. After decades of decreasing extreme poverty, extreme poverty is on the rise again. That's also the economy. And combating poverty and giving jobs to people is also of value. So you shouldn't put this too much in contradiction, as it is about money and about, let's say, the respect for every person, and in the first place, his health, his life. So it is always, as always, much more nuanced than just this contradiction and this polarization between good and evil. No, economy is much more than business and money only.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe I take up also from my perspective the question of solidarity, which is the perspective of Catholic social teaching. And in some way, I think we can admit that solidarity is the translation of the Christian love of one's neighbor to the social and the political sphere. And solidarity is mutual. It's mutual, supporting and helping each other. And it brings an added value also into reality. Pope Francis, he underlines very much that the whole is much more than only the parts. And I think this is one of the foundational ideals and ideas also of the European Union, that there was something coming into being which was more than only putting together nations and national interests. Jean Monnet, he put it once in this way. He said, we are here to undertake a common task, not to negotiate for our own national advantage, but to seek it to the advantage of all. The advantage of all is more than simply summing up the national advantages. And in this sense, I think the European Union is really a model also how to organize community of nations in solidarity.
Thank you. Then if I may continue also with this conversation, not only on solidarity, but I think I like very much this approach that we can all become cynicals, no? That things are not always the way we want, and we can get disappointed sometimes. I have to say that I really liked also in this article of the European Policy Center that you mentioned that this pandemic has also unveiled so many anonymous people who are real heroes, who have given their lives to save other people, like doctors, nurses, sometimes also priests. I read in Italy, for example, hospital chaplains that lost their lives because they were visiting the and actually you say that there are many Père Damien, many Albert Schweitzer. I have to say that I didn't know who he was, so I had to look it up, and I discovered this very, very inspiring character. And then it made me think that we all Christians have a role to play, and maybe there are lots of saints out there that are not leaders, but that they're playing their small part, and that maybe this is what we can aspire to, no? That it's not that we're going to save the world, or we're not going to change the system, but that we can all make our small anonymous contribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, let's say everybody was paying tribute to doctors and nurses and all those who were in charge of helping people in the most difficult time of their life, and sometimes assisting them when they were dying. So this paying tribute to those people is quite unique. I never, in my long career, even in my long life, I never saw that in that way, that let's say the overwhelming majority of the population was very thankful to those people, those anonymous people. There was not one who was taken out and said, "You are the symbol of all those ones." No, nobody. It was really in general, and I found this also a gesture of generosity of a big part of our population, and that struck me. And we shouldn't forget that. And that's why I said we have all those Father Damians and Albert Schweitzer, Nobel Prize winner. I visited his small town in Gabon, in Lambaréné, where he was taking care of people suffering from lepra and all those things. And of course, Florence Nightingale, hero of the Crimean War in the 19th century. But they had a name, they had an image. But all those people who were helping us during the last months, they had no name. They had no name. But the population felt that they were the heroes of our time. And so I found that when we speak about priorities, this gesture of generosity, of thankfulness, was something that I also appreciated very much. So each time I'm looking at the bright side of things, and we shouldn't forget that, because that gives also hope. And hope, I hope that we can speak about hope later on in this conversation. We badly need in these days and in these times, we need gestures of hope. And hope is the opposite of fear. Fear was present on every moment. I can get ill. And if my mother, my father was already ill, she can die. So there was, I can lose my job. I can lose everything. So this uncertainty, this anxiety, this fear was very present in the last 3 months. And that's the opposite of fear, is hope. And that's why these heroes, these nurses and doctors and so on, they were recognized as the heroes of our time. And in some way, they were symbols of hope.
I may add more a theological perspective also on what you said, Mr. Van Rompuy. Hope is a central category of theology and of faith. And it doesn't mean necessarily that things will end well, but it goes beyond suffering, which goes, let's say, also beyond this world. And Pope Francis, in his impressive homily, when he made this prayer in Lent time alone on the square of St. Peter, he said a central element of our faith is that God even can bring out positive things of suffering and of disasters. It's the mystery of the death and resurrection of Jesus, of Easter. And maybe it was by chance, but maybe it was not by chance that we went the end. We celebrated Easter, and the beginning of the end of the confinement was Pentecost. And Pentecost, in a Christian perspective, is when people are gathering and when people are meeting and sharing. And in some way, without imposing it, I think we also can apply what is central in our Christian faith to what we have gone through.
But hope is not only a grace, hope is also a verb. We have to work to become hopeful. We have to make an effort to remain hopeful. We have always to look at the positive developments, even in the worst period that you can experience. You always have to see what kind of positive lessons we have, what kind of positive experience I can have. That's why I say hope is not only a grace, hope is also a verb. It also depends on us. It also depends on us.
Definitely. I think we have to bring together our own efforts and our trust in God's grace and in God's gift.
Also on this, one of the philosophers that inspired Robert Schuman, so he was inspired by the personalist philosophers like Jacques Maritain, but he was also inspired by the philosophy of action of Henry Bergson.
Yeah.
And I think that this probably made a great contribution to the European project at the very beginning, because the founding fathers thought that anything is possible, that we are the actors of history, and as we Christians say, that we can make everything new. We don't have to replicate. So the future is also in our hands. And I think that this is a very positive thinking that encouraged also the founding fathers to break with all the existing beliefs of international politics, and that you could overcome this balance of power and go beyond and establish a new kind of relationship between the states, which I think still many people in the world feel that it's very naive. But I think that this philosophy of action actually could be something that could inspire us Christians today. What do we have to make new?
Mm-hmm. Of course, when I was younger than today, I have also read Jacques Maritain and later on Paul Ricoeur, and now more than those, I'm reading Emmanuel Levinas, which is also great personalist. Even he is not a Catholic, in the sense we often understood that. But in my view, and I was just taking up what Victoria is telling us, in my view, the Christian image of man is also a very realistic man, is a very realistic image. The man is not fundamentally good and not fundamentally bad. Man should not be forced to do the good by the state, because some are of the view that the man is, a human person is tempted by the evil, so you have to oblige him to be good. That's the collectivist view of man. And conversely, a human being, a person should not be completely free, if not the law of the strongest and the worst applies. So man is good, but he can be manipulated by the evil or by men of people with other intentions. So you have also to have a strong state. I think the more Christian approach is man is responsible for his actions. He can make the world a better place. So he has his fate in his own hands. But at the same time, he is not alone in that effort. He is not alone in that endeavor. He tries to do the will of God, but he can do it himself, of course, with help and with grace. But he's asking himself, when he is a true Christian, what would Jesus have done when he would be in my place? And with that in mind, you have this permanent effort to make the world a better place, to improve the current situation. Even it is gradual, even it is step by step. I'm an admirer of Emmanuel Levinas, but also of Karl Popper. Karl Popper was against all these totalitarian collectivist regimes. He believed in man. And he was of the view that you can make progress, even it is not spectacular, not dreaming of a revolution, that's always a danger, but in a very pragmatic way, doing the good, what he called social engineering. And I very much liked it, that kind of view, and it is very applicable to the construction of the European Union. The European Union is a dream, a dream in the sense that it's something that is far away and you have to work in that kind of direction. But at the same time, it's a process of men of flesh and blood, who are not fundamentally good, not fundamentally bad, but are doing their utmost to bring people more together, to work on peace and solidarity. And that is at the heart of the European Union. So this stepwise approach, is gradualism, and even there are tensions for all kinds. And Victoria mentioned the tensions between those who are looking for national interest and those who are looking more for the European interest. But you have to reconcile this, to bridge this, in order to go forward. And I have an ideal, but at the same time I'm very realistic, and that's the way to bring things forward, but always keeping the direction, and the direction is the most important thing. The steps, that's something that the steps has always to be in function of a purpose, of an objective. And as long as you are making steps in the right direction, then I'm already, I'm pleased. So I have a dream, but at the same time I know what we can do and what we cannot do. And we have always to work in a time perspective, in a time frame. You cannot have all the things at the same time. But when we keep the direction, I'm very happy.
Yeah, I want to take up this keyword of direction. And I remember last year, Mr. Van Rompuy, in Urtebies, in the monastery, we had a day on Europe as a spiritual project. And I think in a spiritual, in a evangelical perspective, the direction is the reign of God. And the reign of God, Jesus preached not himself, but the reign of God. And this meant a new way of living together, fraternity, justice, and in modern terms, inclusiveness. And this is the ideal, this is the direction given by Jesus. And I think this crisis also makes evident that we went in a wrong direction. The scientifics of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany, since years, they say that global warming and loss of biodiversity and deforestation increases the danger of pandemics. So it was not a complete surprise. And Pope Francis, who published 5 years ago his encyclical Laudato Si on the care for our common home, he also made clear that we are going in a wrong and dangerous direction, and we have to change. He speaks of conversion. That's the biblical term for a fundamental change, of an ecological conversion and of integral ecology. And in this sense, I think we can also take the crisis as a sign, and a sign which invites for change and conversion. We have to reshape the system, the economical system, and the whole civilization model, and we have to reorientate it towards sharing, towards being more friendly with Mother Earth, to speak again in the language of the encyclical. So I think it's a necessity, and at the same time, it's also an opportunity. And of course, in gradual steps, we shall not make real the reign of God in this world in a final stage, but we can come closer, we can approach. And again, I totally agree that the European Union is a historical example that changes towards the better are possible.
I think we have time just for one last question that I didn't want to miss of my list. And it also builds on a sentence of Pope Francis, because during these confinement weeks, in one of his addresses, he said that the European Union is presently facing an epochal challenge on which will depend not only its future, but that of the whole world. And it was picked up by many newspapers. And now, as we're like phasing out of the confinement and things look better in Europe, but we see that the situation of the pandemic is much worse in other places of the world, and we still haven't opened our external borders. I was wondering, what do you think is the responsibility of Europe for the rest of the world?
We have in Europe a very special model, not a model in the sense that others have to follow us, but a model, I mean, what are the pillars of our way of life, so to speak. That is political democracy, social market economy, now much more ecological, eco-social market economy, and peace. And in this way, you can look at other parts of the world. Either they miss political democracy, or they miss social market economy, or they are waging wars or on the brink of waging wars or like to wage war. But the combination of those three elements is very specific for the European Union. And I think that even many people in the world envy us that we have that kind of system. That system is not definitive. We have to work on our political democracy, even inside the European Union. We have now problems in some countries with the well-functioning of a democracy and the respect of fundamental freedoms. But in other places of the world, they have much more problems. They are living in authoritarian regimes or in brutal dictatorships. That's not our place. That's not our case. On social market economy, we have rising inequalities. Also during the pandemic, there was an increase in inequalities, but compared to other continents, the degree of inequality is lower here than in those in the countries of those other global actors. But we have to improve again. We have to work all the time on a more just and a more fair society. And we have to do it inside our countries, and we have to do it all over Europe. And that's the team, that's precisely the team of solidarity. And then, of course, you have peace. And we all know how precious it was that we had kept it for 70 years. So our contribution to the world is the continuous improvement of those three main pillars of our European society. And again, we shouldn't be complacent and look at how good we are and look how the rest of the world is behaving. That's not the aim of my words, of my short analysis. It's more a challenge for us. We came from a totally different society, a society of poverty, of extreme inequalities, and 2 world wars with 50 million deaths in the first half of the 20th century. We put all this behind us, and Europe reinvented itself in the European Union, built on those 3 pillars, as I said. Look at the United States. The Civil War is 150 years behind, 150 years. And they are still struggling with all the consequences of all what happened during that Civil War. And the racial question in the United States is still a consequence of what happened in 1870 and a little bit later. We turned the page in Europe of those 2 brutal civil wars, those world wars. We turned the page and we started something completely new. And for the rest of the world, Europe is not a symbol of imperialism, of colonialism anymore. That were member states, but those member states build a new future, as I said, in integrating, or in building the European Union. So we draw a lot of lessons of all the mistakes we made in the past. And in this sense, again, Europe is not a model for the world, but I don't envy those who have to live in authoritarian regimes. I don't envy those who live in societies with upstairs and downstairs and with a lot of discrimination and unfairness. I value what we have achieved, but I know that it is work of every day, that to have to improve it, to deepen it, and it's often we are making progress too slow, and sometimes I'm also frustrated that it is too slow in many areas. But compared to the rest of the world, I think we achieved a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to add one thing. Europe, the European Union is the example that reconciliation, peace, solidarity, organizing a union of states around the common good is possible. And Sylvie Goulard, a good friend who was a member of the European Parliament, she said, it's not for European having been better or being better than the rest of the world, it's for having been worse in the 20th century that Europe gave an example of reconciliation and peace. And my hope is that the European Union also will and can give an example of this ecological transition, the just ecological transition. And I think it's very remarkable that Ursula von der Leyen and her commission, she formulated as first priority before the crisis already, what she calls the European Green Deal. And this is very much in accordance with Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si. We need an ecological transition, an ecological conversion. And my hope is that Europe also in this sense can be a model, can give the example change is possible. And I think we are in a moment, if you sum up all the help packages on the level of the Union and the national states, it's more than 6,000 billion euro. And if you give the economy in Europe with these tools and instruments a new direction towards ecology and towards justice, I think, again, there can be a big change, and this can be an outstanding example. And that's the way I understand also this quote of Pope Francis you mentioned, Victoria.
Just adding what you said, Martin, it is extremely important that the recovery instrument created by France and Germany and completed by the European Commission, this recovery instrument has to be, that's the position of almost everybody, has to be in line with the big new priorities of the European Union, is ecological and digital transformation. So we shouldn't now embark on a traditional recovery with new infrastructure, with new roads and all those things. No, the recovery should be in line with our long-term objectives. And you mentioned the biggest dimension of it, the ecological transformation. And so the real statesmanship is in the midst of a crisis, not only thinking at the short term, but never forgetting the direction, never forgetting the long-term objectives. And the Green Deal is the biggest project, not of this Commission, the biggest project for the European economy in the upcoming decades. It is even more important than the famous single market of Jacques Delors. And that there is no kind of consensus that the recovery should be built on the new long-term priorities of the Commission. Not only short-term gains in building this, in building that, no. Climate change is the biggest danger for the human race and for humankind. And we shouldn't lose sight on this longer-term perspective. Victoria, I'm apologizing that I'm too positive. I know it, but I'm always fighting against these negative images, and I'm fully much aware that sometimes I'm a little bit exaggerating in the other sense. But I think in those dark periods and dark times, and the last 3 months, and they are not over, if we really mean when we say that we have to remain hopeful, then we have to see also these positive signs of our time.
Well, thank you very much for this first part of the very lively discussion. There are more than 10 questions waiting already. I don't think that we will answer on all these questions. The first one just continues what's already mentioned about the Green Deal and the economy, and is in French. Je suis française et lobbyiste à Bruxelles depuis 20 ans. Ma question porte sur le plan des relances de la Commission européenne. Deux objectifs sont mis en avant: l'environnement, Green Deal, et la numérisation. Où est l'Europe sociale? Quelle place pour l'emploi, la formation et l'emploi? Voilà. Who would like to answer in English or French? And then we will pick the following questions.
Je vais répondre en français parce que nous sommes convenus qu'une question en français, que je répondrai quant à moi en français. La dimension sociale est inséparable de l'objectif, des objectifs climatiques, parce que cette politique climatique, on ne le fait pas uniquement pour sauvegarder la planète en tant que telle, mais parce que sur la planète vivent jusqu'à présent combien? 7 milliards, bientôt 9, 10 milliards d'hommes, de femmes, d'enfants. On le fait parce que il s'agit de la survie du genre humain. Donc c'est éminemment social. Quand on parle du numérique, le numérique, c'est la façon aussi de maintenir l'Union européenne, ses États membres, ses entreprises, ceux qui y travaillent, compétitifs par rapport au reste du monde. Si on rate la transformation numérique, eh bien nous sommes condamnés à devenir un cimetière économique dans ce monde où la Chine et les États-Unis sont engagés dans cette révolution numérique. Et donc, on ne peut pas être à la traîne. On ne peut pas être à la traîne, sinon on met en danger précisément ce côté social, c'est-à-dire l'emploi de beaucoup de nos concitoyens. Donc, il y a dans cette transformation écologique et dans cette transformation numérique, il y a une dimension sociale. La dimension sociale, dans le sens étroit du terme, il y a beaucoup d'ambiguïté là-dessus. Parce que personne ne veut abandonner dans les États membres, et je dis pas uniquement dans le monde politique, la sécurité sociale, dont les soins de santé, par exemple. Personne ne veut transférer ces pouvoirs au niveau européen. Et on l'a vu pendant la crise Corona, la crise du Covid. Les soins de santé sont restés une compétence nationale et personne ne veut la céder. Personne ne veut la céder. Et donc, c'est quelque chose sur lequel on doit bien réfléchir. On parle souvent de la dimension sociale, mais quand ça devient vraiment concret, et dans la crise pandémique a été extrêmement, hélas, concrète, parce que ça touche non seulement à notre mode de vie, mais à la vie, à la mort, eh bien, on veut garder ces compétences nationales. Et ce n'est pas uniquement le monde politique, c'est pratiquement toute une société qui le veut. Donc, ma position est nuancée. Ma position est nuancée. Le social se trouve aussi dans d'autres dimensions qui n'ont pas le nom de social, mais qui appartiennent, disons, aux soins qu'on veut dédier aux gens, à leur emploi et à leur futur. Donc, je dirais que ne laissez pas vous induire en erreur. Ce n'est pas uniquement le climat pour le climat, ce n'est pas uniquement le numérique pour le numérique. Il y a d'autres préoccupations beaucoup plus sociales qui justifient cette démarche.
Je voudrais juste ajouter aussi une réflexion sur cette question. Je suis très content de la question parce que je parle ici pour le Centre social jésuite européen. Et c'est la perspective de l'encyclique Laudato Si, qui n'est pas, comme ça a été dit, une encyclique seulement écologique, mais c'est une encyclique sociale, dans la grande tradition des encycliques sociales des papes du 19e, 20e siècle. Et le message principal de cette encyclique, c'est que nous devons écouter à la fois le cri de la terre et le cri des pauvres. Et ces deux cris sont liés, sont connectés, parce que c'est les pauvres qui souffrent le plus les conséquences du changement climatique et de la destruction de l'environnement. Et en même temps, c'est eux qui ont le moins contribué. Donc, dans un double sens, la question écologique est une question sociale. Et c'est aux pays riches, aux pays du Nord industrialisés, de combattre le changement climatique. Et il y a ce principe de la responsabilité commune mais différenciée qui a été formulé par le sommet des Nations Unies à Rio en 1992. Et donc, c'est aux pays riches et aussi, parlons de l'Union européenne, de prendre un rôle aussi de précurseur dans cette transition écologique qui est en même temps une transition sociale.
Merci beaucoup. Now we have more than 20 questions. So the questions are just coming and coming. The next one is in English, and it's about the differences between East and Western countries. Although I deeply believe in the European Union, I can't help but feel like the unity among the members is very fragile. I'm thinking about the solidarity during the Corona crisis, but also about the place of the Eastern members in what seems to still to be a very Western members-based union. And the question is, do you share these feelings? And what do you see as opportunities to build bridges and unity between these different EU members?
It's a very broad question, I fear. And you have not only tensions between what we call the East and the West. Some are emphasizing the tensions between the North and the South. And the North and the South, often it's about Western European countries. So you have the Northern countries, all Western European, and a lot of Southern countries, most of them also Western European. So you have tensions within the so-called camp of Western Europe. So it is much more complicated than just tensions between the East and the West. And even in the East, in Central and Eastern Europe, the Baltic states are different from the Visegrad countries, when I look also to the political positions they take. And even among the Visegrad countries, you have more than just nuances. And I look how they position themselves regarding such a crucial item as the new recovery instrument, the new recovery fund. I see that there are fundamental differences between Poland and other countries in the Visegrad countries. So it's always a very complicated situation, and we shouldn't fall into the trap of simplifying things that you have some kind of polarized situation, and it is Brussels and Western Europe against the rest. No, the tensions are much broader and much more complicated than just that kind of dimension between the East and the West. Having said that, during my mandate, I always tried to be not only very respectful regarding what we called at that time the new member states, but nobody is speaking about new member states anymore, and happily so. I tried to be much, not only be respectful, but to integrate them as much as possible. Of course, they would be closer to the heart of the European Union if they would belong to the Eurozone. And I said it also to our Polish friends and in other countries of the Central and Eastern Europe. The hard core of the European Union became the Eurozone. And some major countries in Eastern Europe, and Poland is one of them, they are not part of it. That is their choice. I respect that choice, but you are only really fully at the heart of the European Union, at the heart of the decision center, when you are a member of the Eurozone. And they shouldn't reflect on that. If some of the Eastern European countries, Central European countries, want to play the role they deserve in the Union, they should take their country also to the membership of the Eurozone. Being member of the Schengen area, being member of the Eurozone is essential to play a major role in the European Union, because that is the highest degree of integration. So it's, as I said, it is a much more nuanced than just them and us. And if I can give an advice to our brothers and sisters in Central and Eastern Europe, is join the heart of the European Union, and then you will play the role you deserve.
The next question is even more ambitious. Given the way the United States has handled this crisis on its road to political individualism, could Europe take over the leadership of the free world? Coming from Spain.
I had a conversation years ago, I think 10 years ago, with Henry Kissinger. I was very privileged to have twice a conversation with him. And at a certain moment, he said to me, and we were far away from the crisis we had later on, the terrorism, the migration crisis, Corona crisis. We were only in the Eurozone crisis. And then he asked me, Mr. President, he said, Mr. Van Rompuy, does the West still exist? And it was in a period where we had a very good relationship with the American president, President Obama. Now, since 3 years, we have a totally different president who is doing just the opposite of President Obama. Actually, the only red line in his behavior is that he's doing the opposite of Obama inside the country and at the global level. So the question is, do we still have this free world concept? You know that President Trump at a certain moment said the European Union is an enemy. An enemy. I thought we were allies. We aren't enemies. So we are going through a very difficult period. I hope that will be a change in November, but that's up to the American people to decide. But in any case, we would be much stronger if we could join forces. We would be stronger also regarding new global players as China and others, when we join forces from both sides of the Atlantic. And I know it was a controversial topic, the so-called TTIP negotiations, a free trade agreement between the United States and between Europe. And then when we had realized that kind of dream of having a free trade agreement between those two great entities, then we we could impose our high standards on the rest of the world. And Europe could, with its high standards on social matters, in ecological matters, and food security, and so on. So we could bring the United States to a higher level, and we could bring the world to a higher level. So there is, we are, since 3 years, we are really, really blocked in having a common position on many issues, coming from climate change over nuclear safety in the Middle East. With President Obama, we had almost no differences. With President Trump, we only have differences. And that's a radical change. So this concept of the West and of the free world is unfortunately at this time it became an empty word, really unfortunately. Martin, if you have something to add, please. I'm not the only one who had to answer questions.
Yeah, I appreciate very much, but I think it's up to you to answer these more political questions.
Okay.
Now there is a more spiritual one. Continuing this path of leadership. If the pandemic can be the engine of the new integration among the European countries, will the Church have a major role in this post-pandemic scenario?
That's for Martin.
Well, I think the Church has already a role. I have been mentioning the leadership of Pope Francis during these difficult weeks, and the Holy Spirit has his own ways also to move and to change the Church. I read that in Italy, in one of the national programs in TV, the early morning masses at 7 o'clock from Casa Santa Marta were transmitted, and there were millions and millions of Italians watching this program and listening to the homilies of Pope Francis, and they felt that he really was consoling and was helping in this difficult situation. So the Church has its role. There was also an important message of an ecumenical message of Cardinal Hollerich and the Christian Krieger, the head of the ecumenical representation of the churches in Brussels. And looking at the future, yeah, my hope is that this crisis brings us to the essential questions of life and of society and of and I am deeply convinced that the churches, the gospel, they have important things to contribute and to say. That also Christian social thinking, I prefer to speak of Christian social thinking, not so much of Catholic social doctrine, has very important contributions. We should not take the crisis as an opportunity to insist on the principles of Christian social thinking, but in some way they confirm, the crisis confirms that the principles of solidarity, we have been speaking widely about this, and of the common good, and of being mutually supportive are fundamental in the situation we are going through.
Christian, may I add something that is not only related to the church as such, but during this crisis, I never forget two very striking gestures, even pictures. That's Pope Francis, and you mentioned it, Martin, alone on St. Peter's Square. And leadership is certainly in times of crisis to show empathy to those who are in the same situation as you are. And he was there alone, as most people were alone in the world. And he was in some way translating that loneliness in this very strong gesture, being on the stairs of St. Peter's Square alone. I think it was extremely strong. And it shows also the authenticity, and people are longing for authenticity these times, authenticity of Pope Francis. And the second example is also an example of a non-elected leader, that is Queen Elizabeth. When she spoke in the beginning of the crisis, she had the right words, and referring without mentioning this famous song that was during the war, "We will meet again, we will meet again." A message of hope, a message of hope. We are in trouble, but we can sort it out. As we won the war, we will also overcome this kind of problem. We will meet again, we will meet again. And for me, the message is coming from Pope Francis, and of course with another dimension of the Queen Elizabeth, were the strongest messages during this crisis. They came from non-elected people. That's unfortunate. It has to come also from those who have the mandate of the people.
Thank you. There are some questions about building bridges in several, so this keyword is repeating in some questions, and then came one which is very special and very personal to Mr. Van Rompuy from the Swedish trainee based in Brussels. I have heard, and this is from Facebook Live, I've heard that one of your biggest strengths as President of the European Council was your ability to negotiate and make opposite sides, if not join forces, then at least to reach an agreement. What is your secret in making people come together?
Mm-hmm. I had that questions on many occasions, but I'm not the first one who managed to build bridges and to fix compromises. There were people before my time and after me. So I have not a monopoly of negotiating skills. That is not a false modesty, that is the situation as it is. But for a good negotiator, a good maker of a compromise, his first gift, or his first capability, his first talent should be to listen to people. You have to listen to people, and then you got, and very carefully listen. Sometimes 2 words, 3 words, 1 short sentence, and then you get out. You said, this is very sensitive for him, for her, of course, for that kind of leader speaking on behalf of a majority of his country. So we have to carefully listen. And then the second talent you have to develop is imagination. When you see conflicting interests, different positions, how can we overcome this? And that's the moment of creativity, the moment of imagination. And the third is, once you have what you think to be a solution, you have to fight for it. You have to convince people. And you can only convince people when you not only have the right arguments, but when they trust you. He never betrayed us. That they need to have that in mind. He never betrayed us. So when he is proposing this, it will be that according to him, it's for the common good. Because we have trust in him. He managed in the past to find a solution, and when he is proposing this, it could be that it is also a right solution. So listening, imagination, convincing, trust are keywords for every negotiator in the church, in politics, in the media, in every place where people meet and work together.
When we just continue this very personal sharing now, and there is another personal question, what did you and Mr. Van Rompuy learned personally from, or you changed as a result of the confinement?
Yeah, I said it also in the beginning when Vittoria asked me the first question, and referring to this old man who said the right words were at that time that he put his priorities again into order. I think that was the quotation. For me, it was a period that was not a difficult period. I'm a pensioner, so I cannot lose my job. For a very simple reason that I have no job anymore. I have occupations, activities, but not responsibilities anymore. My children and grandchildren, they live in my neighborhood, so they are not far away. As your family was far away in Spain, Vittoria. Mine were in a circle of 15 kilometers. 15 kilometers. My wife and I, we biked to our youngest kid, our youngest son also. We have 4 kids and 9 grandchildren, and we did it by bike. And all the time we were in the Forêt de Soigne. We hadn't to leave even the forest, so to speak. So we are very, very privileged, very privileged. So don't ask me what was your personal experience. I'm even a little bit ashamed that I had no major problems. I saw everything I want to see, even from distance. I was not ill until now. Nobody in my family was ill. For me, it was a period of reflection, a period of stillness, a period of writing and reading. Of course, we missed people, but thanks to the digital revolution, we could see people all the time, as we can see and speak to each other now. So don't take me as an example. I was overprivileged during this period, but my country was not. You spoke about Spain. Belgium also was very hit by the pandemic. We lost 10,000 people out of a population of 11 million. It is one of the highest per capita. And we lost many elderly people. And those men and women, they died alone. They were buried alone. So I was thinking at them also. Although I had a very privileged position, I was thinking as those who had not that kind of condition and had to live and ill and to die in circumstances that we couldn't imagine just 3 or 4 months ago. And I'm not speaking about all those dramas in Spain, in Italy. In my country, the hospital capacity was functioning well. So we had not that kind of humiliating situations we have in other countries. But still, for those who were alone in their illness and alone in their death, that we have to have that kind of empathy whilst we are not suffering and we are reflecting and putting our priorities right. But for some, there were no priorities anymore. There's the priority to survive, and then those who died, the priorities were over.
The question about priorities, it's actually not very well explained. Well, is the EU sovereignty also the priority to learn from COVID-19 crisis, in addition to one, safety, two, solidarity, and three, sustainability?
Of course. I think this is a lesson we all learned, so that we are depending too much on others for our own security, for the duty we have to protect our people. So we can be solidary for those outside Europe also, if we are much more, or if we are less dependent from outside. That's not a contradiction. So we felt strongly that need. And President Macron in the last months was speaking all the time about European sovereignty, and some thought this is a French idea, it's in line with a great French tradition. But now a lot of people are sharing this idea. And of course it is more than just having our own masks industry, our own ventilators industry. It's now a concept that is going much further than that. We have to take responsibility for our own defense. For sure, after the new isolationism, to some extent, of the United States, we have to be much more sovereign on our strategic sectors, because it could be that the crisis is giving an occasion to investors, be it American, Chinese, or others, to take over some of our key industries, so that we became a dependent continent. No, we have to take our fate in our own hands. We cannot play a role in the world defending our ideals, also our interests, but also our ideals. I mentioned political democracy, mentioned eco-social market economy. I mentioned the peace project. We cannot defend all those things when if we are not sovereign, when we have not our fate in our own hands on crucial areas. And we discovered this in this pandemic crisis regarding medical devices and other things, but it's a much broader concept than that. How to protect better our people without falling into the trap of protectionism. That's a difficult balance, a difficult exercise. How to remain open to the rest of the world and at the same time protecting our people from all kinds of threats and keeping our fate in our own hands. That is a big, big question for the leaders of tomorrow.
Well, it's already 8:30. I think that's still some time for at least two questions. There is a mix of 25 or even more than 25 questions. When we were just before talking, and I asked Mr. Van Rompuy about how long should this part take. So the question was, it depends on the dialogue. If the dialogue is interesting and if the dialogue is alive, so we can go forward. Two questions. The first, again to Mr. Van Rompuy, but I think this is the experience also of every of our panelists. What would you suggest to European young people who would like to make the difference at their modest level to reinforce European values in their own country and between the countries?
Big, big question. I cannot answer also in abstracto. I became a European when I was 16 years old, a pupil of a Jesuit college in Brussels. And the Jesuits made us Europeans in bringing us in contact with other young people from other countries. That was an Erasmus program avant la lettre. And we became Europeans speaking to boys, because at that time it were only boys, boys of other nationalities, Dutch, French, German, Italian. And then we discovered that we have a lot of in common, but each of us was speaking from his own perspective, from, yeah, in some way from the history, also to some extent even the values of his own people, his own country. And we tried to understand each other. We tried to speak to each other also in an organized way. Every evening there was one of the colleges who organized what we call in French a carrefour around a topic, and there was an exchange. We were 16, 17. So I would say to young people, travel, but not only to see monuments or to see the nature or to entertain yourself, but see also the people of those countries. Then you become really a European. Take the opportunity that you have to meet and to talk. The second is that you should listen in some way to those who have a positive view on man, society, on their country, and on Europe. Don't be seduced by populists and extremists, because they manipulate you, they exploit you. And of course, there is also failure of traditional politicians, that's for sure, and I belong to them. But those who are playing with this enemy thinking and enemy creating regarding people of another race, migrants, or other kinds of confrontations and polarizations within the country. Try to be open to other people, because values, that's not something that is abstract. Values is something that's part of daily life. Tolerant, listening, making the best of your personal life, that's Europe also at his best. And this is in danger. We are all becoming very polarized societies, not only in the United States, that's an extreme, but also in our own countries. And that worries me. And it is a poison. And we can only combat it by a spirit, a mentality that is full of respect for each other. In the Christian tradition, we would say, with love for your neighbor. In a more general way and much more neutral, it is the positive values of life. So Europe is not only something that is far away, the European values. European values are those who you are practicing in everyday life, And that's an advice I give to others, to my students, to the people I speak to my own family. I'm not used to preach. I'm telling them, be as open as possible, but not only open to those very simple messages. in which at the end it's the war of everybody against everybody. That's not our future. That's destroying our future.
Thank you very much. The very last questions, I think, you were talking about the people we have lost during the confinement, during the pandemic, coronavirus crisis. There are also a lot of people who give their life, who serve the others. If we ever get back to normal, how not to forget those anonymous heroes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and each phase of history, we tend to forget those who saved us. It was also after the wars. Those who died in the fighting for liberty and against totalitarianism, they were honored, and we paid tribute to them for some time. But after some time, you forget, and then people say, life goes on, life goes on. So we shouldn't forget what we lived through those 3 months, and we speak about 10,000 in my country who died, but without the measures that we had taken, and the government has taken, without those measures, the price would have been 10 times higher, 10 times higher. So potentially, this was an extremely dangerous period. Dangerous period. When you look at the 400,000 people who died all over the world, if those measures were not taken, it would have been at least 4 million. Can you imagine 4 million in 3 months' time? So it was a period we shouldn't forget. We have to draw all the lessons also. What went wrong? Because some of the countries performed very well, even inside Europe, even inside Western Europe. And in some, they paid a terrible price. And what explains these differences? And what kind of lessons are we drawing so that this will not happen again? And I'm not blaming anybody, although and at all. Simply, it is very striking that the results of policies are very different when you look at the countries even inside the European Union. But we should not forget also the third lesson, that health, taking care of people in general, also of elderly people, is a core task of policies, of public authorities, of society as a whole. And I know that we have to look at the budget. I was Minister of the Budget for 7 years and very successful, so to speak, in terms of deficit reducing. But we have to put our priorities. And taking care of people, their health and their well-being is now more than ever a top priority. And that is one of the key lessons of this time. And if we are paying tribute to all those people who took care of us in homes, in hospitals and others, then is to give them the instruments, the motivation, the financial reward they all deserve. And you know, when you are a minister of the budget, it's always the easiest thing is to say no to everybody, to everything. But the art of being a good prime minister, minister of the budget, is to say yes to some and no to our others. And so we have now this feeling, we have this strong feeling that we have to reconsider our priorities. And in this sense, I join what Father Martín Maier said at the beginning. It's about human beings, persons, and all the rest comes second. All the rest comes second. So in policies, healthcare, care for for the oldest among us is something that we shouldn't forget when we elaborate new policies. So we have different lessons we have to draw after the definitive end of the pandemic. But even now we have to reflect on it, because the crisis, unfortunately, is not over. Not in China, not in some parts of Asia, not in Brazil, but even not in Europe. And I hope that we have the worst behind us, but and nobody is sure. Nobody is sure. But in any case, this shouldn't happen again. And so we have to look at the deeper causes of the pandemic, and Father Maier referred to it, but we have also on the short term to draw all the lessons of the conducted policies in the different nations, and some which were performing better than could be an example for many others.
Mr. Van Rompuy, thank you very much. Before we finish, the last few questions were directed to you. I wonder if, before we finish, Victoria and Martin, whether do you have any final reflections, final conclusions to share, please?
Maybe just to confirm what Mr. Van Rompuy said about people who gave their lives. Central message, central key sentence of the gospel is, there is no greater love if someone gives his life for his friends. And that's what we have experienced. That's what we have seen. Medical doctors, nurses, people working in public services and risking their lives, becoming infected and giving their lives. Victoria also mentioned the priests, more than 100 priests in Italy, more than 60 priests in Spain who died by the virus. And of course, nobody looks for becoming a victim, for dying, but at the same time, and this is for me the deepest mystery also of Christian faith, giving one's life is the highest expression of loving the others. And we believe that death is not the end. Death has not the final word. Love is stronger than death, and life at the end is stronger than death. And I think this also became more evident and could be experienced in these difficult weeks and months. God does not want humans suffering. And those who say that this pandemic is a punishment of God, I think it's completely wrong and senseless. God is a God of life. God is a God of compassion and of love. And in my understanding, he was present in the medical doctors, in the nurses, in people who were risking their lives for the sake of the other. That's where God was present, and where he acted also in this time. That's what I just wanted to add to Mr. Van Rompuy's deep reflections.
Thank you. So then maybe what I can share is my thoughts and my little notes that I took after this exchange, because these are the things that I would like to take with me after this almost 2 hours of conversation. And what I think is that this pandemic has made us more aware of our vulnerability, because maybe we were already vulnerable, we just didn't know. So in a way, it was an opportunity to open a period of reflection and realize what matters in life. And I think that we all agree that what matters in life is people. and caring for people, which at the more political European level translates into solidarity. And even if sometimes we can see the downside of things, that I really appreciate that we were really encouraged to look at the bright side of things. And there are many, except that sometimes they're not in the spotlight, but there are many saints out there. And we can also make our own contribution, because as we said, we are all responsible, and we can make this world a better place. So this is what we need to keep in mind. You said that what kind of guidance can we have to try to make this world a better place, and is to think of what Jesus would have done in my place. So this can be already of some help. He also said that we can all build bridges, and maybe what we need to develop as our skills is the capacity to listen, of being trustworthy, so that people will trust that we're looking for the common good, but also be creative, which I think it's also very important. You said that we need actions to promote hope in these days, because there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty. So the opposite of fear is hope, but hope is a verb. So we have to really put it into action. And I think that, at least for me, and I think that for other Christians that are working for the European institutions, these are very good tips, and we really need this inspiration and encouragement, because sometimes we realize that, or we have the impression that things are not really moving, and we can be frustrated. So I think I really thank also the chapel for this opportunity, because I think that for us, it's also necessary to translate fear and turn it into hope. So thank you.
Thank you very much for this lively exchange. You know that preparing this evening, we said no lectures, no papers, no slides. The personal sharing is much more inspiring. And even if this is the virtual cafe, I would like to thank you with something real, with the real cups, the chapel cups, for the real coffee filled with the real best Belgian pralines. And I hope to have in the very next near future to have the occasion to hand it to you. And thank you very much for all the audience, for all the participants. We were about 100 listening. Thank you also to our communication coordinator, to Sabina. And well.
Thank you very much. It has been very nice and very enriching being together. In Facebook, people really also appreciated all your comments. And I just wanted to say that, well, the chapel continues. We continue on real. Today's open during the week, and we continue virtual. Hope to meet you all again very, very soon. And please follow us on Facebook and on our webpage with all the new activities and proposals. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, just the message for the audience. You also know that the chapel lives thank your donations. So especially in this difficult pandemic time and restarting of the chapel, half real, half virtual. So every donation is very appreciated. The details are on our website. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you once again for all the participation, and have a good evening.